Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Dunny. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Rutherford. How are you?
I'm spectacular. I'm spectacular. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that really defines great leaders. And that topic is how to lead in difficult times or divisive times. And what we're facing right now is some divisive times because of the political climate. What you have, Mark, is you will have people that are working next to each other that have completely different views of the world. And because of that, the work output probably is going to suffer if it already hasn't suffered already.
Mhm.
It's going to suffer because of productivity. It's going to suffer because of culture. It's going to suffer because of collaboration. So that's what we're going to talk to that. We're not going to spend time on really the politics of it. We're going to talk about how this is similar to when there's other challenging things that are happening, like layoffs, like when you have to sunset a product, just different things in the marketplace that might make have really difficult times. How do you coalesce as a team? How do you, as a leader, lead this team to drive everybody to a common goal? Really, that's what we're going to talk to everybody about because the way you lead is going to set the stage for everybody else. You have to be calm.
Right.
You have to show empathy. You have to show focus in these difficult times because everyone's watching you. I've always told people the higher you go in an organization, the more important the words you use are, right? Words are always important,
Right.
but when things get ratcheted up like they are right now, every word is parsed. Every word. So it's one of those things as a leader you got to be ready for, right? So, Mark, we're going to talk about a lot of different areas. So let's start with psychological safety,
Sure.
right? So let's talk about that. What do you, when I say that, what comes to mind?
Well, I think that not only is it one of the most popular topics in business books right now, everybody's talking about psychological safety. I think it's also one of the most misunderstood, right? As we go through, because psychological safety in reality is where you've created an atmosphere, a workplace where members feel like they can share their perspective without risk of ramification, a discipline, whatever the wrath may be of somebody in a superior position. And it doesn't mean you're opening up the organization for, just a rant, rave, venting, that kind of stuff, right? But it really is creating the opportunity for creativity, for originality, for the team to get on the same page because everybody has input in a safe atmosphere that says I can share my perspective, opinion, thoughts on something without the idea that suddenly I'll be pushed aside without value. And I think that's an important aspect. But it's often, you know, misconfused, not defined very well. And I think that's something we have to be aware of as leaders move into those positions. What do you really mean by that?
Hmm. Oh, completely agreed. So psychological safety is really important, and we do have to set a meeting, and we're going to talk uh, later on about setting the standards as
Sure.
leaders. But the psychological safety is so important because people in those times you don't want to shut them down, right?
Right.
You want to create a space for them to talk, have a
Right.
voice, or to and what you probably do not want to do is have them talk that have that space be while they're working, while they're doing
Right.
things to each other because then nothing gets done,
Right.
right? So it's the space of people have said this term I've never liked about I have an open door policy. which I anyway. So I think as leaders, we always should be upfront, right? So whether how you listen, how you communicate is really, really important. And I just mentioned a word that I think is critical to this psychological safety, and it's listening.
Sure.
It's real, and you have two people on completely opposite sides of the aisle, and you listen to both of them equally.
Right. Yep.
You're not taking sides. To be
Right.
clear, you're listening to them, right?
That's exactly right.
And then you can move forward with things, because if you don't listen and somebody thinks you're favoring one side or the other, that's a recipe for disaster.
Correct.
You're not going to get the team together, right? So
Right. No, and I think that's a great point, right? The idea of defining what psychological safety is then creates the opportunity for the leader to listen clearly. It's a foundational communication skill, right? Active listening, the idea to understand, and psychological safety is not what you opened this by talking about the political atmosphere as we record this today that we've just come out of, but that really just gave us, you and I, the opportunity to talk about other challenges that exist all the time in organizations. Psychological safety isn't one of convincing the other side, right? But the idea of a leader to listen and to understand each side without necessarily falling to one side or the other becomes very important. Now, at some point, right, we've talked about this in previous discussions we've had, Rutherford, leaders still have to make decisions sometimes.
mm-hmm.
So psychological safety in the aspect that you can share your opinion doesn't mean your opinion is going to be followed, right? But it certainly means that leaders who listen well understand the perspective of what their teams are bringing to the table, and allows them to both make better decisions, but to lead better as well. Because sometimes it's not about decision making. It's about maintaining an atmosphere of diversity from opinion or background or those kind of things too, and allowing all of that to really become energy that drives the organization. But I fall back to, and I know this is my soapbox, you and I've known for 30 years, and that is, let's understand the definitions of these terms we throw around before we just start throwing them around. So.
Yeah, what's interesting is and you and I have been through some different situations. I don't think there's every situation in life I think I've been through as a leader, and I'm sure you have too. In 30 years of leading people, managing a lot of people, it just happens, right? And Mark, you and I have been through times when we had to do the worst part of our job, which was laying people off, and laying great people off, not
Right.
just laying people off,
Right, exactly.
laying people who were spectacular workers, did nothing wrong. Just either the organization was going in a different direction,
Correct.
the market decided for us, right, that we had to
Right.
to lay people off. And could you just speak to how you created that psychological safety, or how you went through that when you
Sure.
had to go through those times?
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Rutherford. When you get in leadership roles, you have to do things that you don't like to do, right? And oftentimes in organizations, those are variables or scenarios that present themselves so that there's absolutely no control on your part, right, as it goes through. They just happen. You mentioned a couple market changes. You mentioned earlier when you're fading out a product as it goes through, but there are other things too, right? How many times have we seen organizations getting taken over by a new organization? Suddenly you've got two of everything. Cultural changes where some new leadership comes in and those kind of things happen. So first of all, understanding that the variable isn't always something that's a controllable variable. It just, you find yourself in those scenarios. Foundationally, it starts at the very beginning, right? What atmosphere have you already created? I think that's important for your organization. What atmosphere have you already created? The second thing is, and I know you and I are on the same page in this, is honesty with the entire organization, transparency up front. Now, in leadership roles, we have responsibilities both up the organization as a leader and down the organization for the teams that we are leading and coaching as we go through. But our responsibility really as a leader, good leaders, it's the people, right? It's the people and the team we work with. So transparency is critically important. And as you go through that, the impact you mentioned, right? Unfortunately, you and I have been through multiple times where we've had to lay people off. That is not a fun thing to do. I've literally sat in this chair 3 different times where I've had to make almost 100 phone calls to let some people know the first of the year you will have a job, and some people know they won't. And very few of them was it any result of anything they've done, right? It's more of a structural restructure, whatever organizations want to call it. But I think if you're honest with your team up front, as much as you can be, as soon as you can be, people know, they understand the changes that are going to come through. So you want to encourage people all the way through. If you've had a foundation and a reputation of encouraging people to be the best they can be to move forward, and you share with them, here's what's going to happen, and this is what we think. You can't share or may not know the details, right? Oftentimes I've sat in this chair not knowing whether at the end of the year I was going to have a position either. That's how organizational structure goes. But I think looking at that allows a true leader to kind of maintain his calm, be very empathetic for the position that he finds his team in, and also to be focused on the issue at hand. And that is what you can do to be the best leader and help people through times of divisiveness, of times of challenge to the organization. And sometimes it's individual challenges too, Rutherford, that people face that we as leaders really have to adapt to.
Yeah, it's funny because it's so important, and everything comes down to one word: it's listening. Really, it's really listening. And you talked about this before. It's not about taking sides. It's people want to know that they're being heard. That's really, if you look at everything that happens because of, the divisiveness of difficulty, it's because they don't feel like they're being heard.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're really talking about is how do you said we're not choosing, we have to make a decision, right? We have to make a decision in business. But with these times, they're probably not talking about work. Like they're talking about how they feel. And they just need somebody as a leader to listen to them and to be heard. And if the decision's made to go a different direction, as long as they're being heard, that was important. I will tell you, as was a second line leader, and the boss of mine, the VP of sales at the time, he was making a decision I didn't agree with. And I said to him, this is when we were in a group discussion, I said, listen, I know you're making a decision. I'm just going to tell you one more time. This is why I think we should go the other way. And he heard me, but he made a different decision. And that's all I want. I just wanted to say my piece, say what I want, and get my opinion out there.
Sure.
What I didn't want to do is to be shut down. And I think that's where everybody wants to be. They want to be in a position where they can talk, where they feel safe to talk, where there's no retribution for having a differing opinion, a different view on something. And then they can move forward. Whatever the decision's made, then we all move forward in lockstep. We're fine. But I want to have that voice at the table, or a voice with my leader, that this is what's going on. So that's the part of psychological safety. Right.
So once we've established that, right, let's move past the scenario that exists, and let's look a little bit. When you had forwarded me this topic, one of the things that, as always happens, you and I started talking, weeks ago about this topic because it's such interest. What does the leader look like in these situations? So we've talked about understanding the scenario, empathy for the team as they're going through it. But what are those things that you look for in leadership now that you're in whatever this divisive time crisis is that you're going through?
So what I look for is a leader who understands that we have to bring people together to create common ground. So common ground or shared goal.
Mhm.
We in an organization we have a goal to hit, right? That I've always used that when people go crazy about different thoughts and different things. I always say, okay,
Sure.
what's the goal? What's the goal? What's our goal? If this isn't part of the goal, then why are we talking about it? Why are we spending time on it? Right?
Right.
That's typical, right? And so I want a leader to listen, you know, and typically that could be in one-on-one times or when you're having a group thing to listen. But then we have to move the the conversation to what needs to get done. And then we have to talk to people about how important their role is in getting us to this next level or finishing the project. It's critical that we make every single person in the organization that we are feel important.
Right. Right.
That so what I'm looking for is that leader has said some things, talked to people, and now everybody feels important,
Right.
right? They might disagree with Bob or Susan or Bill or whatever about whatever outside. No, they might like Ohio State, Michigan, um, but they can still work together, right, to drive whatever has to be done forward.
Right.
And that's the kind of leader I'm looking for that can bring two completely different people who disagree on some whatever it is
Right.
together. So I'm looking for that. And so they think about what's the goal, what's the purpose, why am I here? Okay, what am I doing? That's what I'm looking for. How about you?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think the idea becomes one of you've listened, you've shown empathy, you understand where each of the team members are. You may not agree with their perspective, you understand it, but I think now it's a move ahead attitude, right?
Mm.
What do we have to focus on to get where we need to get at the end of the day, and how can I make sure everyone's involved in that process and that each individual understands their role? I'll give you a great example. One of my favorite, and you know this because I've talked about it since the book came out in 2001. It's the book it's called Shackleton's Way, and it's about Ernest Shackleton, who was the Antarctica explorer back in 1914 to 1916, who took a crew of 27 men down to the Antarctica, and their ship got caught in an iceberg, got frozen, and they were on a float. So you have a ship that can't go anywhere in temperatures that are well below zero on a piece of ice that's floating literally. And as it's floating, it's crushing the ship. Right now, even now, explorers, once in a while will lose somebody on that exploration because of the conditions, the weather, and everything, even with modern times. But back then, it was fairly common. Men who signed up for that were adventurers. Shackleton took 27 men in that scenario, and over a 2-year process, he allowed them to work focused on one thing, that was survival. But he did it in such a way that the leadership characteristics just came through, and he never lost a man. 2 years later, they ended up back at a place called, I think it's St. George's Island, which is the starting point when you're going to be an explorer down there. But he did things in that regard that we as leaders should just admire, and we can learn from him. And the first thing he did was he made sure everybody was on the same page. Understand what our goal was. It's survival. It's survival on a day-to-day basis, right? Don't worry about tomorrow because we don't know. Let's
Mm.
worry about today. He made tough decisions like the ship that was housing them, protecting them initially from the weather, eventually became the fuel for the fires as they moved away from the ship because it was being crushed. And he made decisions with input from his team that before we lose the ship, gets crushed and sinks, let's tear it apart ourselves, take that risk and use the wood for fuel, use the wood for building shelters. Those kind of decisions he made, having everyone focused on that. And there's so many concepts as we go through our discussions today that he brings up. I'm just going to throw out as we get to them. But the one thing I think that stands out leading through crisis is he immediately would address anyone who started drifting with attitude away from the focus of what they're going to do. He addressed it not in front of the group. He addressed it individually, and he addressed it specifically on. He allowed him to vent. He addressed the issue. At the end of the day, Rutherford, do you want to get out of here? Do you want to go back home? Do you want to see your family? Yes. Okay, let's do that. And that was amazing as he went through. So that's the kind of thing when you and I talk about leadership in crisis, you think we had problems? look at what he did, right? And the way he so systematically formed a leadership plan to guide that team and keep them focused. It's an amazing story, and I encourage anybody who hasn't read it to read it because it's just as appropriate now as it was over 100 years ago now.
And so that's and Mark, and that's what we talked about at the beginning. We this is about divisiveness, but it's leadership, and it's leadership in difficult times. And how do you move people together, right? And I love that what you just said about somebody straying outside, and how do you work with that person to get on board? Is again, it's that common goal. Why are we here? What's the number? What's the big goal? What do we? And that it's survival, right? It's seeing my family again,
right?
Or for work, it's achieving this. We're getting this product to market, or we're improving it, or our customer service is better. Whatever it is, there's a goal. If, by the way, if there's not a goal, we got an issue, right? We have a different problem. We have a different problem, right? But everybody should know the goal, should know their role in having that goal come to fruition. If those two things are aligned, there's going to be less turmoil between parties, because that you understand that you play a critical role in that goal, and you know that the person who you might disagree with also plays a critical role.
Right.
Like you need that person to do whatever that job is to get this together. And once you understand that, the other things, go in the background. What's really interesting, we I mentioned Michigan and Ohio State before, and I was thinking about football. And if you think about a football team, where one person gets a lion's share of the credit, the quarterback, or the coach, those two leaders get a lion's share of the credit. But every single person on that team understands they could not get any credit without, if the offensive lineman is letting the defensive line get through, that quarterback's not successful.
Right.
That quarterback is not successful.
Yep.
And it's the same thing for every single player. They understand that their role is important. And if they don't do their job to their ultimate, put every effort in, the team is not going to be successful.
Right.
It's going to be, and that's what we are when we are leading. We're leading whatever team we are. We are, every single person on our team has a role. It's critical that role is completed as agreed upon. And if all that's done, we execute correctly, we will hit our goal.
Right. And I think that really brings to light the idea of people understanding there may be sub-objectives, sub-goals that get us to the bigger goal, right? And creating teams. Going back to Shackleton, one of the things he did is he set up little pods, we would call them today, little task force and teams responsible for various activities, building the shelter, hunting for food, boiling the ice to make water, things like that. He set up little teams that would do that. And the thing he did was not only have them focus on working together, understanding what that team objective was for the greater of the whole team. Can't survive without a shelter. This team builds shelters. Can't survive without food. This team hunts, right? he also demanded, think about this, Rutherford, he demanded they play together. He set up a daily schedule for the team building shelters to stop building the shelter and go out and play their version of what we would call football. They're from England. It was kind of a soccer football idea, right? He created games for them to play. And a certain amount of time every day, that team played a game. And eventually he had teams play against each other for the competition, but to build the unity of cross-team connection. So it's not just here's the task, right? Because that becomes a mundane. Think about this, leaders. If you have a team call every Friday, and every Friday all you're doing is asking how many calls per day you're making, what's your number, where you're going, how many Fridays does that take before people stop paying attention? On the other hand, if you have team meetings where you talk about the success the team's done, and by the way, we hooked up with this team that allowed us to achieve this marketing insight, that allowed us to achieve this short-term goal. If you do that, if you play together, create sub-objectives or focuses or expectations to achieve, then that team becomes unified for their own objective, which leads to the bigger objective. So there's a quote that I love, and I may have said it earlier, and that is, why do we do things well that we should not be doing at all? Right? So everything in a crisis scenario from a leader standpoint really should be driving to get us to the ultimate goal. Support of the team, create an environment that they feel like they can share for the good of the team, and then help us drive toward that goal. And I think that's a critical aspect, as you mentioned earlier.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. I love that. Hey, let's move over to how do we, because we talked a little bit about this in different things about communication, because communication is a critical aspect of this. It's always important how we communicate well. So during these times, the like market disruptions or layoffs, how do you communicate? You were telling me a story about that we went through that the leader didn't want you to communicate to your team things that were going to affect your team.
Right.
How do you work through that?
So one of the things that, from my perspective, and in every leader I've worked for who had strong leadership skills, understands if you're leading a team, that the team has to come first. The people have to come first in that organization. Part of being a leader is and I said this earlier, you're managing, or you have responsibilities up the organization as well as at your team level. But at the end of the day, the number one reason people leave positions is because of their frontline manager, right? At the end of the day. So you have to establish a relationship that goes there. One of the things we went through, I don't know how many years ago that was, you and I sat through a meeting, but we were talking is we worked for an individual at the time who was all about, people are going to leave if they understand we're going to have these changes. Don't say anything to them. We're not going to share. We're not going to be transparent. And what was just one of the silliest leadership moves that you and I have ever witnessed, because we knew the organization had been bought. Change was going to happen, right? So why would you pretend that's not going to happen? The idea is you have to address that. And for me, the idea was integrity and honesty and transparency, even to the extreme where I said, look, my role is with this organization, but it's for my team. My team is the organization, and I'm going to be transparent with them. Why would I hide stuff from people who it's going to affect their lives? We have people who have families, we have people who have responsibility, and these are good people. They understand the marketplace. So please, if you don't want my team to know, there are certain things I understand, details maybe, that we as leaders have to absorb. But for the most part, if it affects somebody's lives, if it affects where we're going, if it affects what that mission is, then you as a leader need to find a way that you can communicate that with your team. And you don't do it behind somebody's back, not your boss's back, not their back. You're very open and honest. Here are the key points I want to communicate with my team. And you share that with them. Because at the end of the day, if you lose some people, it's going to happen. At the end of the day, though, those people who stay are going to understand that they don't have to worry about being surprised by the diverse challenges we face at this time. They understand that both sides are going to be looked at and you're looking out for them. And that's what leaders have to do, right? At the end of the day, what Shackleton told his men, look, we had 27 men when we got here. We're going to take 27 men home, but we all have to play our role to do that. And I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do, and I'm going to model what I'm going to do, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do, right? So you have to trust in me, and you'll trust in me if you know that I'm going to share that kind of transparency with you, understanding what the objective is. And it's an honesty, integrity thing, Rutherford, that you can't measure, right? I mean, it is done by what they see, what they hear, and what they see makes a difference. And if your team is comfortable with that, then you rise through these diverse challenges that we face. And that is so important. That's true leadership.
And we talked about this a couple of times ago that leadership is really has a lot to do with trust. Your team is going to lose complete trust in you as a leader, as a person, as a human, if you don't tell them things that are going to affect their livelihood. Now, understand there's certain things that we cannot say. There's certain things that you have to wait, right? And we understand that. But when something is known, like don't tell them that detail. Well, it's okay. We have to trust our people. We have to understand that this is their livelihood, and if we don't do the best things for our people, we are never going to come back from that as leaders and as a company, because you're gonna whatever the decision is, whatever the thing we couldn't say happens,
right?
They're gonna say, I can't work for that company because they look what they did to me. They put me through this. They didn't have to. They didn't need to. They could have told me. I could have handled it. And that's what's really important. So Mark, I was going through a situation where we knew we were going to sunset a product. It was going off patent. When this is in the pharmaceutical industry, this drug was going off patent. We knew the date that it was going off patent.
Right.
And if you know, right, you probably, if you're in the organization, you're thinking, my time might be up at this organization.
Right.
It's no. So there's no reason for me to say, no, it's not going to happen. Nothing's going to. That creates lack of trust in itself. Now, with this situation was very unique in that there wasn't going to be a generic drug coming out right away, and we also knew that. We just didn't know when, right? So it could be a week later, a month later. This happened to be literally almost 5 years, which is very unusual after the product went generic. So one of the things that I told people to get ready for this event was, I told people, I said, listen, I want you to be great at something, whether that's closing, relationship building, clinical, something about you needs to be great, and you have to double down on that. It's like strength finders type of thing. Mm-hmm. And I told them, here's the reason. If you do really well when things are going poorly in a company, or you potentially poorly in a company, the next company is going to go, wow, you did that when the market was going down. You kept it steady, or you rose, you grew market share, or whatever. You're going to get hired immediately. You're going to get. So again, if you're great at that, you're protecting yourself for the future. And the terminology I use and I still think about is, there's no downside to being great. There's no downside to being great.
That's perfect.
Be great at something and that will protect you for the future. And what was interesting is that's all. And I told people, I said, listen, I can't predict the future. I don't know when this is going to, we know it's going to happen. We don't know when, but for you to protect yourself, continue to grow, continue to go out in the marketplace, and do as much as you can. Now, also, Mark, there were people, and because we know they're you get a call from a headhunter or a recruiter, and before they might not listen, now they're listening. That we know they're listening. We don't.
Sure.
So what I would do, and I think you did the same thing, was, hey, listen, if you get a call from somebody in that situation, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it and make sure this is the right opportunity for you to grow your career. Because listen, so that's the trust that you build, right? That's the things that you go through. So somebody goes, okay. And sometimes I said, run. Sometimes I said, run away. Right? It was depending on the situation. But we would always give the reasons why.
Yep.
Did you investigate this, the company culture, right? But that, I think because of that, we lost very few people, a lot less than we thought, stayed there for those 5 years. And what was interesting is some of the people who made decisions to leave because of different opportunities, they were mad that they left, and they didn't write it all out, because the company continued to do well. The people that stayed did really well,
right.
And they went into situations they left because of fear, they thought, oh, I had to take this, I have to do this. It wasn't something they wanted to do, and they regretted that decision in the future. And that was great to hear, that the people that stayed, they were the ones that were rewarded because of the honesty that the leadership team had. Sure. And we had their back, and we thought about them, and when eventually we did, sunset the product, there was generics on the market, all those people within, I think almost all within 9 months got better opportunities down the line, which is what we want, and what we want in the long run.
And I think as you go through those scenarios that we've all been through, for leaders, the thing to keep in mind is something that we said earlier, and that is you still check in one-on-one with members of your team constantly. Understand, because in those really challenging times, in marketplaces or layoffs or company changes, takeovers, whatever, sunsetting products, whatever that may be, if they don't hear from you, now they get worried, right? Both as a team, but one-on-one. And the second thing is, if they don't hear from you as a leader, if you're going to address the issues one-on-one and as a team, then somebody else is going to put their opinion out there as to what's happening. Mm-hmm. And that opinion may be right, it may be wrong. But if it's the only opinion that's in the market, that's in the atmosphere of what's going to happen down the road, that becomes fact really fast.
Yes.
We've seen this, we opened talking about the political environment that we're in right now as we record this, right? And opinion becomes fact really fast. If you want to know exactly what's going on, go to a network that favors your opinion, and then it's going to be fact.
Yeah.
That is so true in organizational change too, and organizational challenges. Understanding what's out there and making sure you're out there correcting the scenario and being as honest as you can. And that is another great sign of leadership. Understanding what's going through. I go back to Shackleton again. And one of the things Shackleton did, 27 members of his team, right? He understood the strengths and weaknesses of every one of those people. He understand who were going to be those who are a little less optimistic, who are going to be the vocal people. And he addressed that with them individually. And he actually gave them responsibilities to keep them focused on a day-to-day tasks. And you need to be out there. The worst thing you can do is hide in your office, right? I think that's another critical component of leadership in these challenging times when we face them.
Yeah, man, Mark, that's a great point. And I was going to talk about de-escalation. Mm-hmm. So now we know now we don't think there's divisiveness in the sales team or the team or the whatever team you're leading. We know because two people are at loggerheads.
Right.
But
Right.
they are not. So, and you kind of answered it already, but go back and think about how do you handle that situation when you have two or more people disagreeing.
Mm-hmm. So think of it this way. You and I are going to go out and buy a car, right? I'm guessing the car that I'm going to buy is going to be different than the car you're going to buy because you chose to live in a bright, sunny, warm climate. And I live, yeah, sorry. Yeah, we can argue that all day long, but I'm here. My grandkids are here. I'm here. And I live up in Michigan, where, as we discussed before we came on the air, and that is the weather gets pretty bad pretty early. So I'm looking at 4-wheel drives and Blazers and things that can get me through the snow, and you're gonna buy Laura a convertible. I mean, who knows, right? Different perspectives. So as a leader, you first of all need to understand, what does the individual want? That's why it's so important to understand the individuals in a diverse, challenging climate. Understand where they're coming from. So you as a leader have the organizational goal, your objectives in mind, but you understand where each of these people are coming from. What's important to them? What's the priority? You can't tell people how to feel, right? You can't tell people how to feel. And rarely do you change people's minds. But if you can get people as a leader, if you can understand what we said earlier, understand both sides. And if you can understand the individual and they feel like they've been heard, then you can address that. Now, there will be times as a leader, you got to bring those people together, right? The goal often in challenging or diverse perspective, or whatever that challenge is to acknowledge that there may be two perspectives that exist, but the ultimate goal is, how do we get here? So let's not win arguments. Let's come to an agreement that we can work together to achieve that goal and do the best that we can. And that is so critical in teams. And Rutherford, again, the size of the team doesn't matter. The level in the organization of the team doesn't matter. Whether you're leading an entire division like you've done in the past, or you're leading a frontline manager with 8 or 10 people, the idea is still the same, right? You're going to have differences of opinion, different perspectives. Diversity creates challenge, which creates opinion, which becomes very important to me individually. But if I understand those as a leader and I can bring the team together, acknowledge that, both with the individual and as a group, but still move forward and keep them focused, now that's leadership that'll get you where you need to go.
I completely agree, and so de-escalation, I think, gets us into our last big topic is really, these, what kinds of norms do you want to create to tell your team, during those times, what are the standards that you want your team to know about how to get through this, how you operate, how you want to move forward to drive this. So talk to me about that, Mark. What do you think when you hear that?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, I, as the leader, take responsibility for achievement of those goals. That's my responsibility, right? I'm going to take that. So as we move forward as a team, then understand I'm walking with you and I'm guiding you as a leader. Remember this, we're talking about challenging times now, not the proverbial have a great team, step out of the way and let them work, but we're talking about challenging times. And in that regard, I think we establish that kind of aspect. Look, I'll take responsibility for us getting there. You take responsibility for your individual role, whether it's achieving a sales number in a certain geography, whether it's understanding a market change. But you have to set the model of that. And the norm has to be that we don't look at excuses. We look at challenges, we bring them up, and then we address them. And I think if you set those kind of things with a positive, we can do this as a team, then that establishes a baseline that takes us back to what we talked about in the first 5 minutes, that psychological safety zone that says we can share this idea. Because most of the time, new ideas, taking a little bit of risk, comes from teams brainstorming and sharing perspective, differences of opinion. So I think understanding that you as a leader are going to take responsibility, both models and shows the team, I'm with you wherever we go. That's the first thing, taking responsibility.
No, completely. We have, I think, to me, we got to take responsibilities, and because all these things, all these topics, to me, coalesce in the because you have to listen really well, you have to
Right.
collaborate really well, and when the norm that I think about during these difficult times is bringing, having this not open line of communication, just, hey, if you know something, if you hear something, come to me. Like, let's talk about it, and then let's go solve the problem. You talked about this. We have to attack the problem.
Right. Right.
If what poor leaders do is they wish it to go away.
Yeah.
They want you don't wish problems or situations away, or you're like, oh, she'll get over it, or he's not really that upset about it. No, you have to go attack those issues. If you attack that, and what I mean by attack, you have to hit it head on.
Right. Exactly.
And then communicate and really find, because you might be wrong about the reasons why, right? Because we assume the person is behaving because of X, and they might be behaving this way because of Y. You don't know until you ask.
Exactly.
And you don't know what's behind that. There could be things behind that, and you just go, I had no idea that was such a big deal. So having that, for me, the norm is, if there's something, bring it to me, right? Immediately. Like, get on my calendar, if we have a one-on-one schedule, fine. If you can't wait, send me a text, say, I can't wait. We'll talk after hours, before hours, lunch. We'll find a time to communicate.
Yep.
I think I've said this before. As a leader, your best ability is your availability, and the time that you're available for your team in those situations is critical. This is not the time to say, hey, it's Tuesday, we have a one-on-one on Friday. Can I wait then?
Yep.
No.
Right.
No. You just lost 3 days of productivity, right? And you could have escalated the issues because you wanted to wait till your time. When to that person, it was so critical that day, or in that meeting. So listen, I got a meeting. I have 20 minutes between these two meetings. Can we talk for 10 minutes of those?
Right.
Sure. I bring it up, and then we can. So there's always opportunity. I've always laughed when somebody says, oh, I'm too busy to talk this week. I'm like, really? I can get to the Pope this week. You can't talk to me this week? That makes no sense to me, right? Because what that tells me is I'm not important enough for you to find 15 minutes to talk.
Yeah.
When you're going through challenging times, the message, the norm is, you are the most important person to me. You should be that all the time, but especially during these challenging times.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what I was going to say. The message it sends when you say, I don't have time for you, you never get that back. You never get that trust back. You never get that priority back. Understanding that it's that important. Will people take advantage of that? Sure. But as a leader, you can eventually mold them to understand, gee, Rutherford, I appreciate that was important to you. And if it's important to you, it's important to me. And that's why what you said, and I don't want people to miss it, is very important. Hey, I have 20 minutes between this call and that call. Can we get this done in 10 minutes? Great. If not, let's set up a time.
Mm-hmm.
That's different than, hey, call me later in the week. Take action. And that take action model is the other thing I think that's important. Show of leadership of norms for your team, right? As your team understands that you as the leader have an idea of the direction we want to go, right? But I'm also want to have your input as to how we go that direction, right? Here's where we want to go. That's my role strategically to set that up. But I'm interested in what's the path we take? Why is, you may have a different perspective on how we get there and that kind of thing too. And that's why availability, listening, that the communication is so important. At the end of the day, it's so scary when somebody hides in the office and they leave, right? I can't get a hold of them. I can't get a hold of it. I always tell people, whether it's clients I'm working with now or back as a leader, look, I make the decision to answer the phone call, to respond to the text. You send it when you need to send it, right? And I'll expect that you're taking the accountability, responsibility of it's urgent. If it's not, we'll set up a time down the road. But if you decide that that's important to me, I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to reach out back to you. We're going to touch bases in that regard. One of the things Shackleton did in his delivering that team, Rutherford, is he spent individual time with everybody, checking in all along the way, not just at the beginning, checking in with them. How are you doing with that? And if a team said, hey, we're struggling with building the shelters, he was over there helping them, not telling them, helping them. Put the gloves on, pull the wood apart, put it together. And he did that with all the teams he developed. He hunted for penguins. He built shelters. He melted ice. He showed them they could do that. And here's one other factor of the norm, and that is understanding calculated risks are okay, right? In challenging, divisive times, calculated risks are okay, right? You show the team that you're willing to change course if you have to, because suddenly the ice flow you're on is moving. So we were going to go this way, but we can't now. We have to make changes, and you're willing to make that change. You're not stuck in or in love with your plan, right? You have a plan, but you're not in love with the plan if the team needs to make adaptations. And that's the other critical component of leadership, right? Is understanding I'm willing to take calculated risks for the betterment of the team. So let's share that perspective.
That's awesome. So Mark, let's wrap this up, right? Okay, so if you had 3 things to tell these leaders who are listening, what would be the 2 or 3 things? I'll just say 2 or 3 things that are key to leading in divisive times, or when things are not going well, when you get a surprise situation that is going to affect your people or your business. What are like the 2 or 3 things you think about?
Well, I think the first thing is listening. Keep a pulse of your team. That is so important, and we can't walk away without saying that enough. And we talked a lot. The first third of our time together today, we talked about that. But it's so important to understand the temperature of the team, if you will, and where they're at. To listen and understand their perspective. And the other thing I think is, if I'm taking my 2, it's that what you said just a minute ago, and that's the availability, that your team knows you're there. You can't listen if you're not talking to them. They need to know that you have their back and that you're there and that you are going to support them the best way you can. But that support includes hitting the objectives we're trying to get to. Where do we stay focused over the next course? So listening and staying focused, having the availability of your team, I think are the 2 areas I would say are critical.
Yeah. So the last point I'll say is there's a 3-letter acronym I used to tell people all the time. It's called KYP. Know your people.
Yeah.
Know your people really, really, really well.
Yep.
And I'm just not talking about the business aspect of your people. Know their people in their entire being, how they, their family dynamics, their stuff. So know your people, because the better you know them, you'll see signals that some people will do because you know them. Well, this person hasn't talked on this conference call or Zoom call all day, and that's not like them. So they're retreating. Something's going on. Something's going on, right?
Yep.
Boom. And that's when you text and you have a meeting, you call, what you figure out. and you find out what's going wrong or what's going right, or something else. Because if you know your people,
Right.
you can better lead your people,
Yep.
right? And you can push them in ways that you couldn't if you didn't know. If I can't push this person this way, but I know they're motivated by money, or I know they're motivated by recognition, or I know they're motivated by this, or I know that are, they don't want to be called on a team call. They don't want to be, so knowing all that about them and knowing, you know, I'm not talking about, we talked about political. I don't know no, I'm not talking about that,
Right.
but what I'm talking about is knowing your people, so how they can work together well when they're feeling poorly. You just because you know them, you get a sense,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter what industry you're in. The more you know about people, the better you can talk to them, lead them, and the more they will trust you because they know you. You and I, when we started at Bristol Myers Squibb, our first company together, there was we had a leader who knew one thing about every single person he
Yep.
met. He'd come to me, "Hey, how are the four kids?" Like he would say that to me, and he'd say, by the way, that's all he would say to me. Like not, he'd say more, but everybody felt like, oh my God, I can't believe he knows me. He
Right.
remembers this about me, and it was something really simple that and that made him more reachable. Like he
You got
cared. There was a feeling like he cared about me. That's
That's
what.
right.
By the way, there was like what 3 or 4 thousand people in that
Right.
organization. He
Yeah.
knew something about everybody. Every
Yep.
single person. He knew
Right.
something. And so if that person can learn something about 3,000 people, you have 10 people. Trust me, you can learn so much more about them, and you should
Yeah.
know about them so you can really come in and have a human relationship. Is because Mark, you mentioned earlier that people don't leave companies; they leave leaders. One of the reasons they leave leaders is because the KYP is not in place. They don't know.
Yep.
They don't know me. They don't trust me. They don't listen to me. I don't feel that.
Right.
So if we're wrapping this up and thinking about how do you lead, right? Knowing your people and knowing um, how to communicate, when to communicate, if to communicate, because some people it could be if to communicate
Right.
in certain situations. As from a timing perspective, is really important. So the more you know, the better you can lead in difficult times, no matter if it's a layoff, right? If it's
Right.
market dynamics, if it's the political divide, if there's something's going on, the more you know, the better you can lead.
Right. I think that's so important. And I would just wrap my perspective with this. Leaders, everybody has their Antarctica, and it comes along when you least expect it. So we have the day-to-day challenges of running the business, of leading people, of managing issues. That happens. That's part of leadership as you come through. But Antarctica comes along. And if you're in your role long enough, it's going to happen to you too in forms of things you can't control, didn't expect. Um, and in that time, that's the most focused time you need to be with your people. And that's the time people are looking at you to say, show me leadership, right? Just show me that what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and I'll follow you. Because I know you have my best interest in mind. You've listened to me, you've worked with me, you've guided me, you've been open and honest with me. And imagine being in Antarctica, your ship is crushed, it's sinking, and you have this gentleman who's not a big stature. He's looking you in the eye and he's saying, we'll be okay. We'll make this. We're going to get out of this. Stay with me. Let's go. What are you focused on? What's the challenge? And we'll get through this together. Everyone has an Antarctica. It's how you address it that really makes the difference.
Mark, that is a spectacular way to end this hour. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us about this, because because I think it's important because, as we said, anybody can lead when things are rosy. The true leaders set themselves apart when things aren't. And I think you gave the people who lead this a lot of really good suggestions, tools, a way to think about how to lead in these difficult times. So thank you. I will see you again. Hopefully we'll talk in a week or so. Okay?
Sounds good, Rutherford. Thank you very much.
Take care. Have a great day.
Yep, you too.